بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله النبي الكريم أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى ولا تأكلوا مما لم يذكر اسم الله عليه وإنه لفسق وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينهما أمور مشتبهات لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والذاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Respected and honorable brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's my pleasure to be here with everyone this evening. And I'm very grateful to MCC Masjid and board for allowing this program to happen here. Before we begin formally, inshallah, on this topic, I wanted to just make mention and make a dedication that this program, and of course, with all the kind of craziness happening in the world and all the things that are taking place in the world, one thing that we can do is, of course, make dua. And from amongst the things that we can do is be mindful of our brothers and sisters who are struggling all over the world, in particular in Palestine and Gaza. So first and foremost, I just wanted to, inshallah, make this intention, and we can all make this intention, that we dedicate the thawab and the reward of this program, if Allah, inshallah, accepts it from us, that we send the reward of this program also to our brothers and sisters in Palestine, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lighten their load and make it easier for them and reduce the stress upon them and make things easy for them, inshallah. The second thing I just want to mention is that this topic is a very sensitive topic for some people when we discuss the matters of halal food or halal and tayyib, because there are a lot of misconceptions with regards to this topic. So there are great organizations that exist in this country for education purposes. One such organization is the one that I'm here on behalf of, which is called Hafsa. And it's because of this organization that I'm here today to be able to share with the community a little bit about this topic. There is one business, one establishment that wanted to partake and be a part and sort of sponsor this program. And so I kind of advise everyone to consider or explore their website. It's called One Stop Halal. They were a sponsor for some portion of this program. You can find all, the things that we're talking about here, products which are slaughtered by a Muslim, found on their website. So I wanted to just mention that ahead of time before we begin. So with that being said, the ayat of the Quran or the ahadith that I read, I think it's very important that we review them and we look at them and see what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking to us about and telling us to do, and how we should have our mindset as Muslims when it comes to the food that we consume. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-An'am, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وَإِنَّهُ لَفِسْقٌ. That do not eat and do not consume that food which the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not been mentioned on it. And this is a very clear injunction. This is something which there is no doubt about it. Allah is making a direct command. وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا. And do not consume that food which the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not been recited upon it. Why? Because it is وَإِنَّهُ لَفِسْقٌ. Allah is telling you why not to do it. Because it is clear transgression against Allah. By you eating that food or consuming that or putting that into your body, you are going against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with. So on that note, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that I have provided for you one alternative, and therefore by you not eating that, you are going directly against the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's number one. So we're basically turning our backs against the injunction and the decree of Allah. The second thing is that when Allah has provided us with halal options, that we can eat halal food and we have this accessibility to halal food, people make this, I guess it's an excuse where people say that, we can eat from the meat of Ahlul Kitab. And so therefore, we don't really need to eat halal food, or I can eat out wherever I want. So it's very important to understand this, and I would challenge that by saying that first and foremost, when you have a priority, you have something that comes first and something that comes secondary, you always choose the primary option first. So if halal food is available, that which the name of Allah has been mentioned upon it, slaughtered by a Muslim, right? What we know to be halal. If you have that as an option, you should definitely choose that above any other alternative. Whether it's Ahlul Kitab, whether it's vegetarian, whatever it may be. But when you have that as a primary source that's available, you should turn to that first. Why? Because that's awla. That's primary. And the aqrabul marja' and the closest connection we have is to the primary thing, which is when there is a halal option, we take advantage of that halal option. So this is the first thing that's very important for us to keep in mind, that Allah says very clearly, and this is not something which is like an extra credit topic, an extra credit discussion, something that we can ignore and disregard and not give a lot of attention to. Or, oftentimes people make the argument and say that, there are bigger issues in the world today, that we're talking about this and we're dedicating time out of our day and the masjid and we're speaking about this. There are bigger issues in the ummah. I would say that you're right. And from amongst the big issues in the ummah, this is one of them. And inshallah, hopefully by the end of this, we'll see how all of that is connected. But definitely, and of course, it's a little bit of a foolish comment to make to say that this is not a big deal, when clearly I'm reciting, and there are many ayat like this in the Quran that talks directly, clearly about what you consume. People say, whenever you say something, whenever a mullah or a shaykh or somebody says, do this or don't do this, they say, oh, where does it say in the Quran? This is common, you hear this all the time. You say, oh, where does it say that in the Quran? First and foremost, you don't even read the Quran to know where it says that in the Quran, but let's just address that anyways. If you were to say, where does it say that in the Quran, there's no more clear, unambiguous ayah than this one. وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. And do not eat over that meat, of that meat, which the name of Allah has not been pronounced. So it's very clear. Right? It's very clear, it's very direct. So this is very important for us to keep in mind, that I'll even share an example. There was people who mentioned to me, they've said that, you talk about halal food, but halal food is very hard to find. Or halal food is expensive to consume. Again, I will challenge that and say that at the time of Eid al-Adha, when you have to make the qurbani, that's also not cheap, right? You have to pay money for that, $200, $300, $400, $500 for that when you're doing your qurbani. But you still have to do it because it's an injunction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's once a year, so you'll do it. People pay, if you look at your collective monthly subscriptions that we all somehow or another are subscribed to, in some way or another, that adds up every single month. Right? You might not think it's that much. It's $5 a month here. Oh, it's $9 a month here. It's only $1 a month here. You look at that, at the end of the month, you're paying $300, $400, $200, $300 in just subscription fees. There are different ways for us to look, as we do with other things in our lives, that we justify the expense for certain things over other things. And it's just a matter of what your heart and your spirituality finds important. Because if you don't find this important, then as a Muslim, there's a concern here. This is something worthy of being concerned about. If you don't think, or if you don't find any issue with not consuming halal food. The other thing is that one of our teachers, who was just here in Los Angeles for some time, in Tustin Masjid, Shaykh Hashim, Hafidhahullah, and he recently moved back to the Bay Area, but he mentioned that in the 60s and 70s, being a Muslim in America, that was hard. If someone were to say there's no halal food options, he would be one to say it. Right? If he said it at that time in the 60s and 70s, then you can say, okay, yeah, you know what, you've got a point there. And maybe there were very limited halal options then. But then he actually shared a story with us once, and he said that we didn't have halal food or meat or all these options. We didn't have all these alternatives. So what we had was a Bismillah sandwich. And everyone, looking at him like, what's a Bismillah sandwich? And he says, well, we would get 2 pieces of bread, say Bismillah, and then close it, and that would be our Bismillah sandwich. That's all we would have. Why? Because then, unless you went and you slaughtered your own animal, and very seldom would anybody really be able to do that, that's all we had. So now imagine that a person lived for years, probably, by eating meat very less, right, in the year. He sufficed with vegetables and these things, right, veggies and fruits and all these sort of things. And he still survived. And I'll say this even, for anyone who's met him, first and foremost, he's a Shaykh al-Hadith. So in terms of knowledge caliber, mashallah, he is extremely knowledgeable. He spent 35 years in Pakistan. He himself is an American. He's a white American convert to Islam in the 60s. And he spent 35 years he spent like 13 years in Mecca studying. Then he spent 35 years in Pakistan teaching in Madrasa Aisha there in Pakistan. And then he just came back, a few years ago to California to teach me. So I'm very honored and I'm proud to say it. So he was my teacher for 4 or 5 years. Then he came to Los Angeles. We lost him for a little bit. And now he came back. This person has seen things, mashallah. But if you were talking about, is it viable? Is it possible to live without eating meat? And not to say that we have to live without meat. There's meat everywhere available, mashallah. But just to say if you couldn't, I would challenge anybody in this room, even the most physically fit brother, to just go on a walk with him in the mornings when he does his morning post-Fajr laps, right? I would be surprised if you could catch up with him. He was just speed walking, and I was like half jogging trying to catch up with him. So mashallah, the point is, what I'm trying to get at, basically, is that he went through a time, and this is someone who is alive today, mashallah, is someone you can speak to, that did not have access to actual halal options, and yet they still did not sacrifice their iman for it. They still did not sacrifice, eating halal food or ensuring that what they ate was only halal, strictly halal. They did not make excuses. So I just wanted to make that point very clear, that it's very easy to say something and to say that, what are we supposed to do? There's no other options. There's no other alternatives. And the reality is that there are alternatives. It's just a matter of how much himmat we have, how much resilience we have, and how much we want to do anything about it. You see our brothers and sisters who are, as they say, they're gym rats, right? They stay in the gym, they focus, it's part of their schedule, their day. Often spending hours at a time at the gym. Why can a person be so dedicated to staying in the gym and working out and focusing on themselves? Is because they care about that thing, right? Same with any other subject or any other topic. Why are people into that thing? And a large part of that is because they find value in it. So similarly, when it comes to our iman and our faith, this is something that we have to find that value in it. And particularly eating and consuming halal food, because it has a direct link to our spirituality and iman. The second point is the hadith that I read. There's a famous hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentions, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيِّن وَإِنَّ الْحَرَامَ بَيِّن وَبَيْنَهُمَا أُمُورٌ مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ. That which is halal is abundantly clear. We know what it is. Water, we know it's halal and it's very clear, no doubt about it. وَالْحَرَامُ بَيِّن. And that which is haram, pork and alcohol, everybody knows, little children know. There's no doubt about it, it's haram. However, there's a gray area. وَبَيْنَهُمَا أُمُورٌ مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ. And in between the halal and the haram, there is a gray area that most people don't know much about. And that's like if you try to go read the back of a pack of chips or a pack of cookies or something, and there's like 50 ingredients there and you don't know what any of that says, and you're just like, I don't know, can we eat these cookies or not? And that's like the most common questions imams and scholars get. And then I've been a part of this organization dealing with halal food for 16 years now, approximately. And so the most common questions you hear 24/7 is about these things, cookies and chips and gums and snacks and this and that. I'll get text messages like 2 o'clock in the morning. I accidentally ate this chips. What should I do? I'm like, you should leave me alone at 2 o'clock in the morning. Let me go to sleep and then we'll address this in the morning. It's probably a better way to handle this conversation. But this is a reality, right? Then there's that gray area where we don't know what those things are. So then the hadith continues and it says, فَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبُهَاتِ فَقَدْ اسْتَبْرَأَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ. And anyone who is able to safeguard themselves from falling into that doubtful area, the gray area, you have safeguarded your iman, your faith, and your honor. وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. And anyone who constantly engages in the doubtful, it's as if they've fallen into the haram. How so? If you abstain from the doubtful things, then how do you protect your honor and your deen? You protect your deen because if that thing that you ate was actually haram, but you just didn't know, then now you've compromised your deen. So by you staying away from the doubtful things, you've protected your faith. And how does it mess up your honor? Imagine you're a person who's a God-fearing person and you're consuming all sorts of doubtful stuff. Now it turns out that that thing was actually haram. Everybody's looking and everybody sees you and you end up finding out, it's a bad look, it's a bad image that you've consumed something which is haram, and now, you did it, you were careless about it. So now everyone used to see you in a certain way, but now that they know that you engage in the doubtful things, now they see you in a totally different way. So it messes your honor and it messes your reputation up. And as for the one who doesn't care if it's doubtful or not doubtful, they just eat everything. They consume everything. They do everything that's doubtful. It's as if you've fallen into the haram directly. How? Because, and then the Prophet ﷺ himself clarifies. He says, كَالرَّاعِ يَرْأَ حَوْلَ الْحِمَى يُوشِكُ أَنْ يَرْتَعَ فِيهِ. It's like a shepherd with a flock of sheep. As they are grazing the field, there's a clear difference between this is my neighbor's yard and this is my yard. So my sheep only have permission to eat the grass on my yard. So if the sheep start to come close and close and close to my neighbor's yard, eventually a time will come where you cannot tell the difference between where does my yard end and my neighbor's yard start. Why? Because the sheep are eating the grass from both sides. So it's as if for a person who consumes the doubtful, it's as if you are between halal and haram. And nobody in their right mind would take a sip of water and then a sip of alcohol and not know and say, I'm going to just roll the dice. I'll just see, who knows? I'll just take a sip and I won't check which one is what, and I'll drink that too and I'll drink that too. No one's going to eat a piece of chicken and another piece of mystery meat, pork or something, and be like, oh, I had some chicken, I had some pork. You would never gamble on that, right? Because if you don't know, you just close your eyes, someone hands you some meat, you're like, all right, I'll just risk it and I'll eat it. No one would do that. Why? Because you don't know what you're eating. So in the same light, this hadith, which I'm sure we've heard before, is very interesting in this way, that we should not be consuming the doubtful or engaging in the doubtful. Then further on, the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam continues, and he says, أَلَا وَإِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّ وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّ أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبُ. So he says there's a piece of flesh in our body that if that piece of flesh is right and sound, then that whole person is correct and sound. But if that piece of flesh is rotten, then that whole person is rotten. And what is that piece of flesh? It is the heart. So what does this indicate to? This indicates that two things. One, eating halal and abstaining from haram or doubtful has a direct physical effect to the condition of our hearts and our bodies. And it has a spiritual effect on our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our ability to pray and worship and be close to Allah and better in our deen. The direct link in our spirituality to become closer to God is what we consume. In another ayat of the Quran, Allah says to the Anbiya, He says, Ya ayyuha ar-rusulu kulu min at-tayyibati wa'malu salihah. O messengers, eat halal and tayyib food and then do good deeds. There's a direct link between eating halal food and being able to be doing good deeds. So now think for a moment, okay, that, everybody, you don't have to answer this, but people can just think in their own lives. There have been times where we've struggled with waking up for Salat al-Fajr, waking up for Tahajjud prayers, praying our Salah on time, praying our sunnahs and fasting, doing recitation of Quran and giving sadaqah, going for umrah, going for hajj, just good things. We struggle with it. we have $100 in our pocket, but I just don't want to give $5. I don't want to donate $1. I don't want to donate $5. When people come outside and they have tables and they say, hey, there's an earthquake in Afghanistan, donate to Herat, and you're like, nah, maybe some other time. Why? What is closing your heart from caring to donate $5? What's happening in Palestine and in Gaza, your heart doesn't bleed, your heart doesn't become sad. Someone says, make a contribution, do some khidmah, do something. You're like, yeah, forget about it. What has sealed our hearts from getting close to Allah and doing these good deeds? One possible explanation is that what are we putting in our body? People complain that my children, they don't listen to me. Our children are disobedient. My wife, she doesn't listen. My husband, he doesn't listen. Conflict in the home, conflict in the house, conflict all over the place. One of those reasons, and the sabab of that, is what food is being brought into the house. The atharat and the effect of that food. Even this teacher of mine that I mentioned, Shaykh Hashim, people, when you have a guest speaker, sometimes they like to make your ikram and they like to serve you and they want to be kind and generous to you and honor you. So, I'm talking about myself here, but we tried to honor the Shaykh, and he came here for the first time, so we tried to take, what we were thinking was, how could we honor him in the best possible way? Well, in my mind, one thought came was that, okay, let me take him to a nice restaurant, halal restaurant, of course, take him to a restaurant and he'll, have a nice meal. And then he actually said to me, he says, Jabir, if it's possible, can one of your wives or one of your family members make the food at home and then we just have a small meal at the house instead? And I was thinking all sorts of things. I was like, why don't you want to go out to eat to a restaurant? It's a nice place, nice spot, we'll keep it private, nobody. And then I didn't say anything. I said, yeah, I can definitely set that up. That's not a problem. He said, because, and then this was the main point, which was amazing. He says, because your wives, they wear hijab, they pray namaz, they make dhikr, they remember God, they remember Allah. And the barakah that comes from their hands when they're making that meal, you will not get that same barakah being cooked in a restaurant and eating at a restaurant. And I want the effect of that barakah and that blessing of that home in my meal, that I consume that and it becomes a part of me. Subhanallah. That's shocking. That's amazing. That someone is thinking. And of course, who else better than, Shaykh al-Hadith who could think of that, mashallah, very pure intention. But this is the point that I'm making, that this has an effect. The food that we eat has an effect. The way the animal is slaughtered has an effect on the person who eats the animal. In Hindu culture and in some Buddhist cultures, the way they kill the meat is horrendous. I don't want to get too graphic here, but just to put it simply, Muslims, when we make dhabh of an animal, we cut the throat, we cut across by hand of a Muslim with a sharp blade, with preferably one cut, and the animal is out. The animal bleeds out. All the blood, up to 17 pounds of blood, is removed from a beef carcass. From one cow, up to 17 pounds. It's like some of your children. That much blood comes out of an animal when it's cut by the Muslim way, the Muslim method. And this is the best way. Actually, a slaughterman in one of these facilities told me, I was leaving a beef slaughterhouse. It was a non-halal beef slaughterhouse. They wanted to convert it to a halal slaughterhouse. And I saw all the meat that was hanging. I saw the animals get slaughtered. Then I saw them in the coolers. Then I was leaving. I finished my inspection and I was leaving. And I see from my rear view window that plant manager is running after my car. He's literally running after my car. And he's going, wait. So I stopped the car and I say, what's going on? He goes, I just want to tell you one thing. He goes, I know you did your inspection, but I just want to tell you one thing. I'm very familiar with the halal kill, with the halal slaughter process. I said, oh, that's very interesting. He goes, yeah, I just want to say one thing. You saw the color of the animals that was in our slaughterhouse? What color were they? It was this color. It was like dark burgundy. The meat was very dark burgundy. And he said, that beef is not the way your beef looks like in a Muslim slaughterhouse. The slaughterhouse in a Muslim slaughterhouse looks like pink. It looks light. It's very clean. He goes, it is the best tasting meat. Why? Because all the blood drains out of the animal. And in our slaughter practice, we shoot the cow in the head. The cow sits on the ground and then we cut the heart open and let it drain from there. so much of the meat restricts inside of the body that when you literally cut open the flesh, it's dark red. And he told me that. This is shocking, right? But this is the reality of how these things are done. So in any case, going back to this original point, that this teacher of mine, Shaykh Hashim, he was saying that there is an effect on the meat. These Hindu practices, the way they cut the animal is they don't even cut from the front, right? There's a type of meat, the style of cutting an animal, they take a huge blade, like a sword, and while the animal is facing this way, somebody comes from behind and cuts the animal from the back of the neck with one swipe to completely cut off the whole thing. And sometimes they don't, because it's very difficult to cut from the back. It's a spine. Spine is full of bones, thick bones. So what ends up happening, they end up chopping and chopping and chopping and chopping until finally the head is severed. Eating that is going to have an effect on your body and your spirituality and your akhlaq and your character. And eating halal meat is going to have an effect. Having a Muslim slaughter the meat by the name of Allah Azza wa Jal is going to have a spiritual effect on you differently than if you were to eat a type of meat that was slaughtered by no Muslim. Some machine is turned on and is killing your animals, 10,000 chickens a day, an hour, 10,000 chickens an hour. There's going to be a different effect. This is a reality. This is not something which anybody's hiding or anything. This is just a reality. So the point is that in the hadith itself, the wording is clear. And the wording of the hadith mentions that why, and this is something for us as Muslims, we take wisdom and lesson from everything, right? From everything in our lives, we take a lesson from them. Shaykh Hashim, the same Shaykh I'm talking about, right? He used to come to San Diego because of the beaches. And fun fact, at 73 years old, mashallah, he is an avid surfer. You would probably never think that. So he surfs every Saturday. Actually, one of the conditions of him moving back to the Bay Area was that he wants to be able to, he's going to teach in our madrasa, but while he teaches Monday through Friday in the madrasa, he said, on Saturday I don't want anybody to book any programs for me because Saturday morning until Dhuhr time is my surf time. So I'm going to go into the beaches and I'm going to surf from before Fajr time until Dhuhr time. It takes a lot of energy to be able, anybody's ever gone and done that, again, it was a very difficult task, mashallah. One time actually, I'm telling random stories now, but at one time we went before Fajr because he wanted to go to a beach really far away, distant. And we go there and as he's paddling out to go into the water, there were whales behind him. And I'm seeing whales and I'm seeing the Shaykh al-Hadith. I'm like, should we do anything? I was like, I can barely swim. What am I going to do? Just seeing him swimming out towards these whales in the ocean. So in any case, this is, mashallah, a person who we take lesson from all things. And this is the point I'm trying to get at. The hadith itself states, the first half is talking about eating halal and the effect of halal. The second half of the hadith talks about the condition of the heart and how effective the food that we consume is going to have a direct link to our heart. And in turn, the effect on our heart is going to have an effect on everything else that we do in our lives. Our spirituality with Allah, our closeness to Allah, the effect of our children. Imagine for a moment a nursing mother. A nursing mother who is eating halal food, the effect of that food goes into the milk of the mother that goes into the child directly. The effect of that spirituality and that closeness to Allah starts there. Actually, it starts even earlier than that. One of my colleagues gave an example once, and she said that imagine a pregnant woman, that if everything that she eats and drinks goes into nourishment and nutrients that develop the child in the stomach of the mother. So now if a woman is eating haram food 24/7, drinking haram things, all of that is going into the nurturing and development of this child. So don't you think the effect of that negative consumption is going to go into that child also? It will. There will be an effect. Illa ma sha Allah. Similarly, a mother who only eats halal food, only makes the dhikr of Allah, only listens to the dhikr of Allah and the Quran and tilawah, that's going to also have an effect on the spirituality of the child. That child and then is going to be absorbing all of that, physical and spiritual nutrients. When that child is born, will that child not have a different effect? Definitely it will. These are things that we need to take into consideration, because eating halal food isn't a difference between should I exit here to go to McDonald's or should I exit here and go to whatever halal restaurant is over here. It's not just that. It's deeper than that. It's the effect, generational effects. My teachers and our elders, they used to say you know, Jabir, the only reason you are, I was born and raised here, born and raised in the Bay Area. He said, the only reason you are the way that you are is that somewhere up in your family, there must have been someone who made dua for his lineage. And Allah accepted that person's dua for you. That however many generations later, today now you are the one who is practicing his religion. Whereas you have 100 cousins on both sides and maybe they're not. Maybe it was the duas of someone who was accepted. And like this is how we should be thinking. The next morsel of food that goes into my mouth, what effect is that going to have generationally for me? For me, for my children, for my future and my progeny. This is a big deal. It's a very big deal. The third hadith I want to mention is also another famous hadith that I'm sure we've all heard before. It's a lengthy hadith. But the last part of that hadith is what I wanted to specifically emphasize on. The Prophet ﷺ mentions so beautifully that the command to eat halal and tayyib was a command that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to the prophets. And then that same command Allah gave to the rest of mankind. This is the same commandment to the messengers as is the rest of the ummah. And he said that you should eat halal and tayyib and you should do righteous deeds and good deeds. Then he mentions at the end of this hadith, the Prophet says, ثُمَّ ذَكَرَ رَجُلًا يُطِيلُ السَّفَرَ أَشْعَثَ أَغْبَرَ يَمُدُّ يَدَيْهِ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ يَا رَبُّ يَا رَبُّ. So he mentions the story of a person who goes on a journey, an extensive journey, and he becomes disheveled, his hair is all messed up, his clothing's all messed up, he becomes covered in dust, right? Because back in the day, if you're traveling, you're definitely going to get dusty. And he raises his hands to the sky to beg Allah in dua, and he's calling out to Allah, Oh Allah, Oh Allah, Oh Allah. And then the Prophet ﷺ says in response to that, وَمَطْعَمَهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَلْبَسَهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَشْرَبَهُ حَرَامٌ وَغُذِّيَ بِالْحَرَامِ فَأَنَّا يُسْتَجَابُ لِذَلِكَ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. So then the Prophet mentions this whole story about this person, whoever he was, going on a journey, going through difficulty, raising his hands to the sky, begging Allah and making dua. And then the Prophet himself says, and his clothing is haram, his food is haram, the drink that he's drinking is haram. How will then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from him his prayers? How? How could Allah accept? Now the thing is that just reading that hadith by itself at face value is scary, is surprising, is shocking. And people also, the thing is that people always blame the mullahs and the shaykhs and the imams and stuff like, oh, you always make everything haram, everything's haram, everything. And you just make everything that we have fun, haram. You find a way that everything people like, you make it somehow haram. This thing is that no mullah here is making these words up. These are directly from the Prophet ﷺ. So it's very important that we understand this. Just reading that hadith by itself is shocking. But I want to also bring your attention to an additional point. This person, right, whoever this person was who went on this journey, he goes through yutilu safar, he goes through a long journey. He's a musafir. We know from the sunnah of the life of the Prophet ﷺ that he mentions in the hadith that a person who is a musafir, his du'as are mustajab. When you go and you are a traveler, your prayers are accepted immediately, right? Your prayers are not rejected if you are a traveler. So the first thing about this person is that he's a traveler. The second thing is ash'atha akhbara, meaning that he went through difficulty, he went through hardship. We know also from the sunnah that anybody who goes through difficulty and hardship, their dua is also not rejected. You go through some pain in your life, you go through some hardship, some difficulty, you're heartbroken, you're sad, you're full of depression, you're grief-stricken. That dua that you make at that time is not rejected. That's point number 2. This person went through a difficult time. Number 3, he's putting his hands up and he's begging Allah and he's making the dua of the ghariq, the dua of the drowning person, where your hands are in the air and you're just begging Allah for His mercy. We know from the sunnah that the dua of the ghariq, the person who is drowning, is not rejected. So my point is that in this hadith we take another lesson. that 3 things that we know to be true from the sunnah of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that if any of these instances were to be your life, you experience them, your du'as should be accepted right away. This person has all 3 of these things, and even then his prayers were not accepted. Giving us another glaring reason to take this topic serious, and to make this important, and to reflect on this and say, man, what really am I consuming? An example can be made that if you saw somebody in Taraweeh in Ramadan praying the whole night, 1,000 rakats of nafil, and they're just constantly hitting the mats and they're praying and they're praying and they're praying. Externally, you might say, wow, mashallah, this person is such a spiritual person, because look, they prayed, 50 rakats of Taraweeh, they prayed 100 rakats of nafil, they woke up for tahajjud. But if that person did not have wudu when they started, right? If they didn't have wudu when they started, it didn't count. None of it counted. So your intention was nice, but you didn't get the prayer. Why? Because you didn't have wudu. Similarly, if a person is doing all of these ibadat in his life, and he's trying to be, do all these good things in his life and be a good person and give sadaqah, go give charity, go for umrah, do all these things, but the prerequisite is the ensuring that what you're consuming is halal, I'm not going to say it doesn't count, but it's on that same path of it not counting. Because we know from other ahadith that a person who eats haram food, that their prayers are not accepted for 40 days. We know that their du'as are not accepted. Their prayers are not accepted, even though they still have to pray them, if you eat haram food intentionally. Therefore, this is not something, again, respected brothers and sisters, that we can take lightly. And I'm sure we've heard topics like this before. We've heard things like this. We've heard discussions like this. We've heard bayans or khutbahs that talk about the importance of eating halal or consuming halal food. That's fine. But the reason why this is so important is because we have to take responsibility and accountability for what we do and how we live our lives, and how we engage our lives, and how we engage our families as well. We are responsible for that next generation and the future progeny that comes after us. I want to just highlight just 2 more additional points. That there are also some misconceptions when it comes to halal food. These are things that people say. These are things that I'm sure we've heard as well. There are misconceptions that have basically hijacked the Muslim community when it comes to the eating of halal food. The first is that when people say, I'm going to go eat at, some food, or we're going to eat halal food, or we're going to go to somebody's house or something like that, people often ask that, can't we just take, let's say you're going to a restaurant, you're going somewhere to eat, and someone says that their food is halal. But then somebody else asks, more clarifying questions. Oh, where did you buy your meat from? We all have that one friend maybe who reads the ingredients on the back of the chips bags, and it's kind of like you don't want to be around that person. You go to a restaurant, they're asking, can I see the chicken? Can I see the cheese? And where'd you buy from? And you're like, come on, man, we just want to order some food and go. But that person is asking these questions. That what is wrong with asking this question? That can't we just trust the person's word for it? Can we just take somebody's word for it when they say something is halal? Is there that responsibility of having to go out of your way to verify further? And I just wanted to clarify that point, maybe just additional point. So the main thing is, first and foremost, ignorance is not bliss in Islam. We have no reason to use the excuse that I didn't know something. I didn't know is not going to be a hall pass on the day of judgment when you're facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He says, why were you eating all of this haram food? And you're like, oh, I didn't know. You're like, no, you did know, you just didn't want to act on it. Or it was socially awkward for you, or you didn't want to leave it. The same argument is what a lot of social drinkers make. People who drink socially but they don't drink alcohol on purpose, they say, oh, well, it was just awkward to say no to my coworkers. It's awkward to say no to my boss. Oh, my family members, they drink on, occasionally. So they offered me a glass and I would be the only one who didn't do it. So I just, I drank some with them. Yawm al-Qiyamah, that's not going to stand. You're not going to be able to say that in front of Allah. Oh, it was kind of awkward. It was Thanksgiving dinner. The turkey was there. The bottle of wine was there. I just kind of had to. No, you don't have to. You don't have to do anything. So ignorance, first and foremost, is not bliss. That's not an excuse that we can rely on, number one. Number two, to verify something, I'm going to mention a story that maybe this is relevant. Maybe we'll take benefit from this. Once Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he had a servant. And this servant was a Muslim, but before he was Muslim, he used to engage in a lot of shady practices. He used to have a lot of weird jobs that would make him money, but they were probably not the most halal jobs. So once Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was coming home, and there was a meal ready for him, so he was eating some of that food. He was about to start eating this food. And so he asked his servant, oh, where'd you get this food from? How'd you prepare this? He says, actually, I'll tell you a funny story. He says that, back in the days of Jahiliyyah, in the days of before Islam, I used to be a kind of like a palm reader. I used to do palm reading. And he himself is narrating this servant. He goes, I used to do palm reading and people would pay a lot of money for it. And then he says, I wasn't even good at it. I was just kind of like tell people some fake stuff and I would take their money and, I would just go about my day. And he said, but I made a lot of money doing that. It's not so uncommon today, unfortunately, where you have people getting swindled all the time. I heard the craziest thing. There was a fundraiser and somebody said, whoever he was, it was inside of a big hall. I was there for volunteering for a table, for a booth, for something else. But I was trapped inside of the room because it was like this and there was all these doors. So he had security guards at every single door and they locked the door. He says, we're not letting anybody out until we hit our fundraiser goal, holding everybody hostage. And then he said, anybody who donates whatever amount, I don't know what he said, like $50,000. He goes, whoever donates $50,000, I will unlock a special dua that nobody has ever heard before. And I'm like, the moment somebody offers you a special deal like that can only be found, like a Black Friday sale dua, run away from that person because that's sketchy. This is not authentic at all. So this person, going back to the story, the servant of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he says that I wasn't really good at it. I used to just kind of mess with people and then I would make some money and then I saved all that money. So he says, I made a lot of money from that. So what I did as a result was I took that money from, swindling people and doing palm reading, which is a type of, jadoo and like weird, reading palms and stuff like that's all haram anyways. So he says, I took that money and I bought meat for you and I made this dish for you. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is eating that. He's been eating it while he's telling his story. So then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, of course this is in line with who Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was as a person. He put his finger in his mouth and he vomited everything he consumed. Because the servant says, هَذَا الَّذِي أَكَلْتَ مِنْ, he goes, this is what you ate from. This money that I earned through this halal, haram mean. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq threw up all of that food. Why? In the commentary of that narration, it mentions Abu Bakr as-Siddiq did not want a single piece of haram food in his system so that his body will not take nourishment from haram. Because one of the reasons why your dua will not be accepted, which I mentioned in the previous story, which was the person who went on the long journey and everything, his food was haram, his drink was haram, and what was the other quality? He was nourished upon haram. وَخُذِّيَ بِالْحَرَامِ. And had Abu Bakr as-Siddiq eaten that food, he would have been sufficed and he would have been nourished by that haram. So he did not want to fall into that category, so he threw up everything. Now I'm not saying that if you ever go somewhere and you get invited somewhere and then you find out that the food was not halal, to go in the bathroom and regurgitate everything and spit it all out. I'm not encouraging that at all. But what I am saying is that that's how serious it was to them. They took it that seriously that it was worth throwing up. You would imagine, you have some sickness, you're going to throw up. Why? Because it's going to kill you. Imagine that their thought process about eating haram food was the same wavelength as it's going to kill me. It was equal. That if I eat this haram, it's going to kill my spirituality. I got to get rid of this out of my system. Just like somebody else would if you drank poison. You have to throw it up, otherwise it's going to kill you. That's how important it was to him. That's how serious it was. So now going back to the original point, that can I just take a Muslim's word for it? There is no precedent. There is no example by which we can say this is a valid excuse to not ask whether this meat is halal or not. Now, there are instances from the lives of the Sahaba where the Prophet ﷺ was invited and then he went and ate at the house of one of the Sahaba. One of those was the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. One of those was Jabir ibn Abdullah. One of those was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And there are more like that. The difference is, they were the Sahaba, and the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum obviously had access to the Prophet ﷺ. And also number two, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims all killed their animals in the same way. They had the animal there, they would say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, or they would take the name of Allah and they would kill it. The Jews would say the name of Allah and the Christians would as well. And already it's okay to eat from the meat of the Ahlul Kitab if that is being happening. So that was a similar practice. And unfortunately, the world that we live in today, America, first of all, does not care about you as a Muslim, does not care about your dietary concerns. America does not care that you cannot eat, gelatin. America doesn't care. So when when your local imam tells you that this candy is haram and you get mad at your imam that, oh, why is this candy haram? It's not his fault. The candy company doesn't care that you can't eat gelatin. They're like, this is the cheapest possible ingredient I can use. I'm going to use this. They don't care about you and I. We have zero market share, really. I mean, I don't want to get into all the politics of that, but in large part, we really don't matter to the American populace about whether or not, you can eat certain ingredients or not. Whatever's cheapest and it makes the fastest possible production, we're going to put that in there. So we're last on the list. Last on the list. So again, going back to this point, that is it okay, or is it, do we have to ask if this food is halal to eat or not to eat? The Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, they were very different. They were different. They were in front of the Prophet ﷺ. The style of killing and slaughtering the animal was the same across the board. They had very little concern about whether or not this meat would be okay to eat or not. The same cannot be said about living in America today. Even, just for the sake of information, kosher in America has so many different definitions that the Orthodox Jewish community will not eat the kosher from Hebrew National. Right? Orthodox Union will not eat and support the kosher of Hebrew National. At one point, Costco used to sell hot dogs that said Hebrew National hot dogs. The religious Jewish rabbis would not eat that. They would say that's not kosher. And on top of that, kosher has other issues, which is they allow alcohol. So if that was included in the process of producing the food, this is a concern that you and I would not be able to consume. Cross-contamination could occur, and we would not know. So that's just, another point. And I guess it does lead me to my last misconception, which I'll mention, and I think, it's probably an hour, and then we'll leave a few minutes for Q&A and then take a break before Salatul Isha. 2 hours might be a little bit too long. So I'll just mention this last point, and then we'll open it up if anybody has any questions. But which is that another misconception is that people often say, why are you worried about the food itself? Whether it's halal or haram, just say Bismillah and eat it. It's a very common misconception. Why it's a misconception is because this has also been hijacked, unfortunately. It's a completely mixed situation that we have adopted and said that this applies upon everything. Let me give you the example to make that make sense a little bit. People use that, say Bismillah and eat it, in this way, that if I right now want to go to McDonald's, or if I want to go to Arby's, or if I want to go to some steakhouse, I can order the food, made, cooked, and when it shows up on my table, I can say Bismillah, and like a Harry Potter spell, suddenly that food will now become halal, and now I can eat that food. That's how it's used. Okay? That's how that is being used. And that's how most people understand it. That when they say, oh, just say Bismillah. There was a brother who, many years ago, I remember, he was extremely strict about his religiosity, his family, and everything. And I used to think, that's a very noble thing. Until I saw him one day at an Outback Steakhouse, going inside, and he took a picture of the meal that he was eating, and he sent it to the group chat, and he was saying that, steak night with my wife. And his wife is a niqabi, and they're sitting at Outback Steakhouse and they're enjoying a steak. And everybody was confused. For the first couple of hours, nobody said anything. Then somebody messaged him and says, brother, how are you eating that? Oh yeah, he said, no, just say Bismillah and eat it. That was for me my first experience of seeing that. Now that is how this thing has been hijacked and adopted. But let me now explain the correct application of that statement that we have heard in the past. Okay? The story originates that a group of people came to the Sahaba and he gifted them some meat. Okay? A group of people gifted the Sahaba some meat. So the Sahaba didn't know who those people were, so they took that meat and they went to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, O Messenger of Allah, these people just gave us this meat. What should we do with it? And so then the Prophet told the Sahaba, Sammullah wa kulu. He said, Sammullah alayh wa kulu. He says, take the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then you eat from it. So, and in another narration, I think it's mentioned, Sammullah alayhi wa kulu antum. Something like that. That you only, you Sahaba that are asking me this question, you only, this is specific to your case. You take the name of Allah, say Bismillah, and then you can go and eat that meat. Why this is important? In the case that, in the narration that says antum, that specifies that group of Sahaba, it's a case-specific scenario, makes a lot of sense. Because that would indicate that not everybody has permission to do this. Anytime somebody gives you some food, you just say Bismillah and eat it? No. In that narration it says you specifically, which means in this situation only, you guys can say Bismillah and eat it. And then that's it. Doesn't apply anymore. But in this narration where the Prophet just said, take the name of Allah and eat it, right? What was the context behind that? The context behind that was, that group of people that gifted the Sahaba the meat, they had just become Muslim very recently. And the Sahaba did not know who they were. But the Prophet ﷺ knew. And because of that, the Prophet said, when the Sahaba told him these people gave us meat, when he found out who it was, he knew right away, oh, they were new Muslims. That's why the Sahaba didn't know them. So then he told the Sahaba, take the name of Allah and go eat that meat. Why? Because the meat was already halal. It's just that you didn't know who they were. That's all that it was. So the correct application of using this statement, just say Bismillah and eat it, which gets horribly butchered across the country, at MSAs, at banquets, in events when you're traveling the country. People say this all the time to each other. Oh, just say Bismillah and eat it. Let's go to McDonald's. What are you talking about? So, that's not the correct application of it. So again, just to clarify, just say Bismillah and eat it does not make a haram food item magically turn halal. But rather, it was for clarification about something which was already halal, but the Sahaba did not know that it was halal. Therefore, the Prophet said, say Bismillah and eat it. These are just two misconceptions I wanted to add some clarity to, because these are things that get commonly used and we hear them all the time, and they really mess up our functioning. As a matter of fact, last Ramadan, I gave a talk after one of the Taraweeh prayers. It was on the weekend, and I saw as I was leaving the masjid, in the outside courtyard, they had the big garbage bins. And I just saw the golden arches, the famous golden arches of McDonald's. I saw multiple bags just stuffed into that garbage can. And I was just thinking maybe it could have been anything. Really, I gave the benefit of the doubt. But my curiosity got the best of me, so I went dumpster diving. So I went back to the masjid and I looked inside of the garbage bag and I pulled out just one bag. I pulled out one bag and inside I saw more bags, but that one bag confirmed it was a bunch of McDonald's. So I asked the youth director of that masjid, I said, hey, you guys should just be a little bit more mindful that it's Ramadan and people are fasting, obviously. But, if you're seeing young kids or whoever with bringing McDonald's, you should just, stop them. That's not a good thing. You shouldn't be bringing that into the masjid. And he says, oh no, that was our iftar. In the masjid, that was our iftar for that night. And that just, blew me away. What do you say? That was the youth director from the masjid. The appointed youth director is serving McDonald's for iftar. So these are things that, while they may sound also sometimes kind of ridiculous, the reality is it's happening. This was last year. So these things are happening. We have to be mindful, and it's very important that we take all these things into consideration. I don't want to speak longer than this. I think it will get a little bit cumbersome and lengthy. I know Salatul Isha is also at 8:15, but in any case, we'll take some questions, I think, for the next few minutes, if anybody has any questions or wants to get clarity. And then also there's maybe a break for, I think there's a food truck outside, right? So if anybody wants to grab food before Salatul Isha, they can. And then, then after that, inshallah, we'll stop before Salatul Isha. So if anybody has any questions, inshallah, yeah. So you're talking about the bug, right? The red 40, the cochineal bug. It's a little, so this is another, sister asked a question about, in one of the classes, I talk about this a lot. In one of the classes, there's an ingredient that, for example, in the most common place you can find this is in Kern's guava juice. Somebody's gonna probably get upset. They probably have it in their fridge right now. The Kern's guava juice, that's just plain guava juice. Just look at the ingredients. There's an ingredient that says cochineal. Google that. Cochineal is a red bug the size of your thumb that is a very common ingredient in dyes to give that red color. And what they do is they dry it, the bug, it's actual bug. They dry it out in the sun. Then when it's fully dried up, they grind it up and they use that as a powder to create the dyes to put into drinks and foods and all sorts of stuff. Just for the sake, actually a couple years ago I said the same thing. I think I was also here when I said that, or I was somewhere online maybe, and somebody messaged me and they were like very upset. They're like, well, I love guava juice, is there an alternative? So there is. I'll give you guys some alternatives. One in particular, Costco sells a guava juice, 100% guava juice, and that doesn't have that ingredient in it. So, you can buy that instead. But to answer the question about whether or not that's still actively used ingredient, it is. Kern still uses it. They, as far as I know, and I would say maybe the last time I asked about that was 2 years ago. So my latest information on that would be from 2 years ago, would be that they still use that cochineal ingredient in their Kern's drink. They have not changed over to a synthetic. And as a matter of fact, I would even add that there are certain foods that still contain that dye in it. And I can't think off the top of my head which food ingredients, but it's still very common. It's more common than another ingredient known as cream of tartar. Cream of tartar is used, it's a derivative of the wine barreling process. It's an active ingredient used in baking. So if there's anybody who likes to bake, look at your ingredients, your icing, your cake mix. You'll see on the ingredients cream of tartar. It's a white liquid. That is sourced from when they make wine, they put them in these wooden barrels and they age them underground. When they're done and they take the wine out of those barrels, on the inside of the barrel, these crystallized pieces, these little crystallizations, they take that and it's a very good emulsifier for baking. And that's commonly used. So that comes directly from the winemaking process. That's also common. But this cochineal ingredient, the bug, is just as common as that still, which means it's still actively being used. Yeah, so I hope that answers that question. Absolutely. So the sister asked about, I was mainly speaking about meat items, but she said also, what about your income? So definitely, that's absolutely included in that, right? And of course, I just specifically chose to speak about meat consumption But yeah, your income. This has another effect on a person's spirituality, right? Where their source of income is from, whether your income is halal income or haram income. The same effects that I mentioned about affecting your prayers, your worship, your ibadah, everything, definitely has the same effect. And it's more difficult because now you have to make a lifestyle decision, right? I make $50,000 a month working this haram job, or I can, make $15,000 a month working a halal job. It's a huge sacrifice. This is a personal challenge each person has to make on their own. But does that mean it doesn't matter? Absolutely not. It matters. It has an effect, right? I can't afford that lifestyle anymore if I go get a halal job. Then downgrade. What are you going to do about it? You're saying my iman or my job. And each person has to find the value in that sacrifice. So. Why? Yeah, so this is a very common issue nationwide about people who just don't eat halal at all. They say it's okay. Some of that I addressed. People make excuses that it's meat of Ahlul Kitab, one. As for just no reason at all and just say it's okay to eat, I have never heard that. But maybe that's probably where, because that would just basically be saying I can eat haram and it's halal, and that's super bad, right? So whatever the origin is that clarification is necessary. But when it comes to family, so the brother's question is, how do you address this very sensitive subject with family who doesn't eat maybe a zabiha, doesn't eat meat slaughtered by a Muslim, and how do we get them to that point? It's a very sensitive subject, right? And this is something that you have to approach with hikmah and wisdom. The most important thing is to never get into an argument about it. Never really fight about it. Because if the person doesn't understand what you're saying, you have to get to the point of comfortability to just talk about it first. Many people, they will shut that down. I sat with a restaurant owner for 1 hour straight describing just the different methods of slaughter that take place in America, right? I explained it to him. I said, I went to 10 slaughterhouses, and these are the different ways I saw an animal being slaughtered. He was from Afghanistan, so I said the same thing. I said, look, in Afghanistan, you go to anywhere in Afghanistan and you tell somebody, I want that sheep, go slaughter that sheep for me. Every single person will do the exact same thing. And forget just Afghanistan. Go to any Muslim place in the world, right? Go to like the corner of Indonesia somewhere and say, I want to eat this, sheep. They're all going to get that animal, probably tie its legs down, put it on the ground and say, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and cut the throat. That doesn't change anywhere. Where it changes is mostly in Western developed countries because they want to maximize the amount of animals they can slaughter and produce and put out there, so they'll incorporate. And the ajib thing, the scary thing is, how much time do you really save by not slaughtering it by hand and slaughtering it by like shoot it in the head or something? These factories are willing to save 8 seconds. If I can save 8 seconds each animal, I will adopt that, and I will not adopt killing it by a Muslim or using Bismillah, etc. So going back to the original point, the best method in my opinion is use wisdom, know the time and the place when you communicate something. Don't just at dinner time, at that time be like, oh, I'm not eating this, and flip the table and say, forget about it. No, the best time is like when everybody's in a good mood, an open mood, and you know that a conversation can happen, knowing that this is not a switch that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. People have to understand. You also need to become educated to be able to explain to them certain points. Like I mentioned about like the kosher issue, right? If kosher was such an acceptable thing, why would the kosher companies between themselves have conflict, right? It should be across the board. It should be the same thing, but that doesn't exist. So now which kosher brand do you follow? If you're going to follow 10 different kosher companies, you might as well just stick to halal then. You know, you're going to do the same thing there you're going to do here. How does that make it any easier for you? It's going to be the same issue. So again, the point is that it requires education. It requires having that sense of wisdom to know when is the right time to say something and when is the wrong time to say something. Also knowing that it's better to be friendly with your family than to lose them over this matter. Right? It's better that you eat vegetables and vegetarian for the rest of your life as long as you're with them than for you to cause a scene over one meal and lose your family forever. Lose the du'as of your parents, lose the du'as of your family members, etc. You see what I'm saying? So it's definitely a difficult, unless you are the person who's in the position of that authority. And on that note, I will say, I will give our sisters all the credit here, because generally speaking, our sisters are the ones who are going to be buying the groceries. They're the ones who are in charge of taking care of that department. And it largely falls on their responsibility to control. Look, even if you're, hypothetically, even if your husband doesn't believe in any of this stuff, he's just going to make sure, he just wants to know that there's food on the table, right? So if you go buy the meat from the halal restaurant, the halal stores, etc., he's not going to ask you a lot of questions about where'd you get this from, where'd you source it from. Maybe here and there a few people will. But this is why I say that the sisters, they have more control in this department. They can bring about that change because they can switch the meat and not make a fuss about it. But in any case, it's a difficult situation to be in. And always remember that the bigger picture is that you don't want to lose the relationship, right? So you take the sacrifice yourself, but you don't lose the relationship. Yeah, so the different classifications or categorizations. When people say halal, my assumption is what everybody is thinking is the same thing, which is, if I say the word halal, I'm thinking a Muslim says the name of Allah at the time of slaughter, and then he slaughters the animal. I think that's what most people want to believe is what's happening when they see the word halal. The sad reality is, in more than, I don't know, 90% of the cases, that's not what you're getting. That's not what you're getting, right? What happens, and then, so halal means, just to go over the definitions for everybody, halal means permissible in Islam. Zabiha means the type of slaughter used for an animal. And zabiha literally means that a Muslim should take the name of Allah at the time of slaughter and make dhabh with their hand and cut the throat of the animal. This is what zabiha means. There is no other type. If you just go by the definitions in the Quran and Sunnah, there is no other definition. It's just that. That's all that it is, right? So these are the different definitions that are used. There's marketing tactics. People put all sorts of stuff on labels and boxes and things like that. But the alternative, and that's what I think you're mentioning, is that what is the most commonly accessible product right now in America? If we're talking about poultry and chicken, for poultry and chicken, it's very specific, and it's very unfortunate, I would say, because what happens is, what you find is called machine slaughtered chicken. Machine slaughtered chicken is a type of product, chicken product, where at the factory, there's no Muslims that are present. There is a rotary blade, like a fan, I suppose. I don't have a fan in here, but a spinning blade that doesn't move, okay? It's stationary. Like, imagine at the end of this table, right, there's a spinning blade right here, okay, and it's just spinning. There's a line of chickens that are hanging upside down, and they come on this, like, you know, conveyor belt line, and they're coming down, and as they come in front of this spinning blade, the assumption is that the chicken's neck is going to get cut by this spinning blade, and then as it continues, it'll drain, and then it'll go to the next station. This is called machine slaughter or mechanical slaughter. This only happens to poultry. So chickens, duck, turkey, okay? So in that instance, who is saying Bismillah? Nobody, right? Nobody is saying Bismillah. And on top of that, how are you going to say Bismillah to a non-functioning, non-Muslim, inanimate object? Right? The rules of zabh is that the person themselves, the Muslim, uses the tool to slaughter the animal. I can't press a button at 4 o'clock in the morning the blade turns on, and then leave for a whole day, and then come back and say off, and then count every single chicken that was slaughtered that day and say, that, mashallah, our halal, 500,000 chickens are halal. That's not how the rules of fiqh work. That's not how the rules of Islam work. You can't just press a button and leave and then come back and it's like, oh, all the birds killed that day are halal. Jews do that. A rabbi, I heard from the slaughterhouse that the rabbi flies over the chicken plant in an airplane and he blesses the plant one time and everything there becomes kosher. That's not how things work in Islam. It doesn't work like that. So this is the alternative that's out there. So when you see boxes of chicken at the grocery store, the question you would ask is this mechanically slaughtered or is this slaughtered by hand? And why this is a controversial subject is because people say, oh, why are you asking all these questions? This is cheaper, this is more expensive. So then that's actually the real question. The real issue is how much I'm willing to spend on something slaughtered by a Muslim versus something slaughtered by a machine. And this is a very controversial issue that many people are very, sensitive about and afraid to speak up about or talk about rather, because it's a big market out there. Yeah. So I hope that clarifies the brother's question. Yeah. So hunting is totally different. It's a completely different category because there are specific hunted animals. In hunting, it's different. You could shoot the animal. You could use bow and arrow. You can send a trained dog. There are separate rules for hunting. And the only reason I didn't bring that up in this discussion tonight was because just for the sake of the context, I was focusing on the bigger picture of just defining the terms and the concept behind it. But in summary, hunting would be permissible whether you're hunting birds, so using a pellet gun to shoot down the birds via a shotgun, or you're hunting deer or elk or whatever big game animals and use a bow and arrow. So the rules of fiqh allow that, for example, if you shoot with a bow and arrow, that you say the name of Allah on each shot and you take it, and then you go and you cut the animal ideally before it dies. But if it dies, it would still be permissible because that's your hunt. If you send a dog, hypothetically, let's say you have a trained dog that's with you, right? And usually they send dogs out for bird hunting. But I guess you could send dogs out for other hunting. In certain countries, they send out bigger animals that they go and hunt these big game. But let's just say it's duck hunting. You're going duck hunting one morning and you and 5 of your non-Muslim friends are there too, and they all brought their dogs too. And you send it out, but your dog is trained, and so you say Bismillah, and you go and trying to find the duck, and another dog goes with him, and now you don't know whether the duck was dead or not, but these 2 dogs come with it, and now you don't know which animal killed that duck and brought it to you. So you cannot eat that food. You wouldn't be able to. But if it was just your dog that you sent out and he brought back the animal, whether it was dead or alive, it would be permissible. Why? Because you trained that dog, and on that dog you said Bismillah and sent it. This is a direct hadith of one of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum that this happened to them. That 2 dogs went out when they were hunting. One was trained, one was not. And when he got to the animal that he hunted, the animal was dead and both dogs were standing above it. So he didn't know which dog choked it out. Was it his trained dog or the other dog? So the Prophet ﷺ said, you cannot eat this animal. So that's kind of the origin stories of hunting. So I hope that clarifies that question. So from what I can surmise, that why the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam even said to them in the first place to say Bismillah is contentment of their heart. There was a shak in their heart, and these are the words the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said to them: say Bismillah to remove the doubt from your mind, because I have done the background checks that you did not know about. So for you to say Bismillah, it removes the doubt from your heart so that you can eat it with content. The issue becomes that the way the application of that's used now is that people are not doing that in any way. Nobody is. I can tell you, McDonald's is totally haram. But when you're going and buying McDonald's anyways, and you're bringing it here on this table and you're saying Bismillah, you're thinking, I'm making this halal. And that's completely inaccurate. That's not even the situation that this was the original context of that statement. The original context was, it was halal. I just didn't know. So now you inform me, oh, don't worry about it. Just say Bismillah and you can eat it. It's fine. Why? Because I know who that was. They slaughtered it properly. I was at the farm. In this case, you cannot use the say Bismillah and eat it to convert something from haram clearly to halal. That is the misuse of that statement. So that's another good question. So what if you go to a friend's house and they're a very good Muslim and they offer you this meat and you know that they're good Muslims? So I would say this is case by case. And the only reason I say that is because I say that because of my experience in the halal industry in this country. I've been working with this halal organization for 16 years almost. It's like more like 14 years I've been working with this directly with slaughterhouses, seeing labels, packages and everything. People can be extremely sincere about buying the right meat and making sure it says halal, but they don't know what type of meat that is. It could be that mechanically slaughtered chicken. It could be that beef that was shot in the head, for example, and it will still have a halal label on the packaging. And some grocery stores will buy it because it says halal and it's the cheapest one available in the market. So they'll purchase it. So the reason why I say case by case is I have seen with my own eyes some of the most righteous people that I know, my closest friends, even some ulama who are unaware of this issue of the halal and haram matter in America, eat at a person's house and that food was not halal zabiha. That was an animal that was not acceptable, and I found out later, and I knew, and I didn't mention anything to them in the moment, but I informed them afterwards that, look, this is, you have to be a little bit more aware of what you're purchasing. The reality is that some people will have that awareness, some will not. So certain friends, certain people's houses when I go to, and I go to their place, I know that this person knows about those things already. So there I won't even question it and I'll eat the food. I've been at a wedding where like 10 ulama were standing behind me and they came up to me and they're all waiting for me to see what I'm going to put on my plate first. So then if I put chicken on my plate, then they're all like, oh, okay, it's all good. Jabir put chicken on his plate. Yeah, I mean, it's not a good thing in the sense that, you have to be very sensitive because you don't want the host to see that and feel bad that what did I do? But at the same time, that's why I'm saying it's case by case. It's a difficult position to be in, but it's the reality. And like I said, there's nobody to be upset at other than the fact that this exists in the marketplace today. Tomorrow morning, any one of us can go to a local grocery store, halal market, and just ask, what type of chicken do you carry? And they'll tell you. And it says on the box itself, mechanically slaughtered, hand slaughtered. Is there a certification, not a certification? All these things matter. And I suppose, this is a good time to mention that part of this organization that I'm a part of called Hafsa is that we offer a type of auditing certification program where we have inspectors who go out once a week, they check the products, they check the meat, the invoices to ensure that the products that they're carrying are only hand-slaughtered products. That way you have full itminan and comfort knowing that everything I eat in this place is slaughtered by a Muslim, the name of Allah has been taken, there's no mixing with anything else. If you check the Bay Area, we have like 50 stores that are certified like that. Los Angeles has somewhere close to 10, 12. And inshallah, if Allah Ta'ala wills, then here in San Diego also hopefully we'll start a development or a chapter like that. But this is why we have to have these conversations first, to speak about this so that the community is aware that these things happen nationwide. Yeah, so I hope that answers that. Yeah. Yeah, so the organization, just briefly, and I know we have about half an hour before Isha or 45 minutes, so if anybody needs to take a break, of course, please feel free to do so. But this organization, Hafsa, has been around since around 2007. It was started by two ulama, Mufti Abdullah Nana and Shaykh Hamza Makbul. And the whole concept of this organization is to offer a service which audits, a third-party audit service that verifies and checks stores, meat markets, manufactured good items from farm to fork to check every step of the way to ensure that the product is a hand-slaughtered product. And so that when you go inside of a restaurant, you go into a meat market, all the meat that you're consuming, for a fact is hand-cut. Therefore, it eliminates all the having to investigate on our own, because that's extremely time-consuming. Someone is going to most likely ask me, oh, then what's all the acceptable brands now? That's going to take another half an hour to go through that list. But easier than that would be, do they have the logo, the certificate or not? If they do, I can eat anything here without asking questions. And if they don't, then I need to, further investigate. So that's the service that's offered. In terms of fees or the status of the organization, this is a non-for-profit organization. The fee for services for the certification auditing is $25 a month per establishment. That's $300 in a year. And to be honest, I know that, it's a number at the end of the day that, people don't like to pay. They don't like to pay for anything. But the reality is that it's a service. It's a voluntary service. You subscribe to it. You get that audit who comes every single week, checks your products, verifies things that you're bringing into your store and establishment. But the bigger benefit is that you bring comfort and ease to the rest of the community. That they know what to look for when they go inside of your store, that they know what they're getting each time they're there. And so this, alhamdulillah, we have chapters across the country in New York, in Chicago, in Detroit, in Washington State, in the Bay Area, Sacramento, Southern California, in Los Angeles area, and hoping for, inshallah ta'ala, with community support, in San Diego as well. So in a nutshell, that's the organization. I'm going to have the same discussion, same talk tomorrow, inshallah, at Darul Uloom as well at 6 p.m. Just again, for the sake of just sharing this information with the community and creating that intention and that desire so that we can begin to have these conversations. So that's kind of the story behind the organization. Yeah. Excuse me? Yeah, so organization takes donations, but yeah, it's entirely funded by just the certification fees. That's how the organization, certification fees and donations if they come in, and that's about it. Yeah, actually, one of the I mentioned this in the beginning. One of the suppliers or one of our certified products, kind of like a meat market, is One Stop Halal. One Stop Halal is an online service where you can purchase all your meats from, and they do next day delivery. It's very convenient service. They are also certified by us, and all their meat products, they go through a rigorous inspection process to verify every item they buy before they put it on their website, before we can push it out and sell that product. So, but yeah, so there's no grants, there's no government funding, there's no other additional income coming in. Nobody is making a ton of money from this organization either. As long as I've been a part of this organization, I would say probably the majority of the time that I've worked with Hafsa, I was on a volunteer basis. And obviously we do have paid employees who they work 40 hours a week. They work part-time employees 20 hours a week. So for them, they are paid for their services, but the organization is entirely sustained this way, and it's run by ulama. That's the other thing. Yeah, it's a fully scholar-run organization. Yeah. Yeah, advocacy is like this, right? We go to different places and communities that request us to come, so we'll do educational programs. But for businesses specifically, we definitely do that. So we try to reach out to stores. So the general process of how these things begin is when we first have a group of dedicated volunteers, we start with that. So when we have dedicated volunteers who are committed, for example, to being inspectors or auditors, or want to have this established in their community, the next step, what we would do is we would establish that team, train that team on how to do audits. Then they would go out into their communities and all the halal meat markets and grocery stores and restaurants, and we would speak to them, encourage them to switch over to this program and to get established into this program. Then that way that continues to grow. As I've been here in San Diego so far for the past 2 days, I've already received close to 4 additional applications for Los Angeles area. Meaning, once it gets established, then the demand is already there. People will see that, be like, oh, I want that too. And then just like that, it becomes a domino effect. So now we have 4 stores on the wait list right now for Los Angeles area that, I have to contact the inspectors there and inform them, hey, go visit these stores and begin that process. So that's generally the timeline on how things get done. The certification process, from the time they apply to the time they get certified and we publicize it, we post it online and we market for them, is a little under 3 weeks. So it's relatively quick turnaround time. And the only reason it takes that much time is if the meat products need to be switched, you have to finish that product or return that product to order the hand soldered product. If there's certain ingredients, because we check everything, not just meat. We check ingredients, wet ingredients, dry ingredients. We don't allow any restaurants that have, for example, hookah. We don't allow any restaurants that have alcohol, half halal menu, partial halal menu. It has to be completely, totally halal. No mixing, no alcohol, no any of those things. So we have to vet all of that, and we have to go through all that. And depending on how many ingredients we need to check, it can take a little bit more time or less time, and then find substitutes for you. Once that's done and everything is switched over, then the inspector goes again, does a complete review. Then after that, we can then send you the certificate. You can print it and post it. Then we post it online, and then we get the word out with the communities as well. Part of that also includes establishing a good relationship with the masajid, so that when we do market that business, the masajid can announce it as well. This is the first, Hafsa certified restaurant in San Diego. Please go show your support, etc. And then you patronize that business and you support them. And like that, we continue to support one another. Yeah. None. So this is the advocacy part, right? This is education to build that kind of encouragement, so that from here onward, inshallah, we can have that actually happening. Right now, we have, like I mentioned, in Los Angeles area, we have like 10 or 12 stores that are certified. I have 4 more on the wait list. And now, inshallah, we are starting with some volunteers right now, getting close to that process of getting volunteers who are interested in being auditors. We're getting that team together right now. So if anybody's interested, inshallah, please reach out. But that's the next step, inshallah, in the process. Yeah. 0, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's there. It should say under certified establishments. If you type in hafsa.org/SoCal, it should give you the list. Excuse me? No, it's just Hafsa. HFSAA.org/SoCal. Say that again, please. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, like it's a difficult conversation to have. The answer to that, is mostly explaining to them that no, I trust you. It's just that I don't trust the market that exists in the world today. I spoke to, for example, a halal expert, and he told me that there's different ways that animals are slaughtered, and that's concerning to me. And for example, if I want to buy chicken from this grocery store, this halal grocery store, I found out that the product that they carry is a mechanically slaughtered chicken product, and I don't feel comfortable consuming that. In my mind, my understanding of halal is that a Muslim says the name of Allah at the time of slaughter, and he slaughters by hand. That product is not that. Therefore, I don't feel comfortable consuming that. And so that's why I'm asking, and that's why I'm verifying for my own sake. Again, I'm mentioning that can be a very sensitive conversation to have with certain people, especially if they're, let's say, a friend, someone you know, some grocery store, somebody you're acquainted with. But the best way is to turn it around and make it about yourself, but also highlighting that why you're concerned about this issue. That's the safest approach, in my opinion. No, I don't. I think I mentioned that also. There is no precedent to say that I can't ask. That doesn't really exist. I have actually asked people to find for me a source, it's from an Islamic point of view, that says you shouldn't ask when you're invited somewhere or anywhere and there's meat presented to you. Where does it say? I have really had a hard time, and I say this genuinely, where does it say not to ask to eat? To me, the only times I've ever heard that is from a cultural point of view, or a social point of view, like it's like bad etiquette or something. But not really from an Islamic contextual point of view, or finding from primary sources that says anything about not asking. If anything, you should verify everything. You verify everything. And also, definitely it is your responsibility from a fiqh point of view to investigate, because this affects you at the end of the day. Your emotions of upsetting that guy is a secondary, tertiary point that's much less important than what you're about to consume yourself. So when I said earlier to the brother who asked about his family situation, and I said you want to maintain that relationship, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. There is no obedience to the makhluk and the creation of Allah in the disobedience of Allah. So if we're eating haram food to make my uncle happy, unfortunately my uncle's going to have to be unhappy. You know? So I hope that helps. Yeah. Yeah, so that's another one, right? So there's very clear ahadith about not eating at establishments or restaurants, that have alcohol in them. And, this is a very difficult one, I think, for people because they see it as, well, that's the only halal restaurant, for example, or we like that restaurant. The sad reality is that there's, like I said, very clear ahadith where the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam cursed the person who carries the alcohol, the person who opens the alcohol, the person who sits with the alcohol on their table, the transporter, all these things. So definitely it should be avoided at all costs. And the one thing that I could say about that I have heard is that if you have absolutely no other alternative, then you should take that food to go and not eat there. But if they're, for example, selling alcohol in a cooler this separate versus cooking with alcohol, but that dish doesn't have alcohol, that's a different conversation. But if it's just because they sell the bottles, like for example in the cooler, you should avoid it at all costs. But if you have no other alternative truly, then I have heard some scholars say that you should take that food to go and not eat it in the restaurant. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so that's a good question. So I would say it depends on, the situation, right? So again, there's a degree of context that it requires. If the person you're asking, if you have doubt that if they respond in that way that they may be lying or they may not know or they're just saying it just to say it and you get a weird feeling about it, then I would either verify or abstain. That's just me speaking here. In terms of responsibility, your responsibility is to ask and to verify. That doesn't mean they need to bring receipts and show you boxes and things like that. You asking, hey, look, my own personal, for example, habit is that I only eat hand slaughtered, and while I appreciate your invitation, I will politely decline. No, I swear, it's hand slaughtered, I verified. Then that's on you on whether or not you want to eat that. That is verification. But again, the reason why it matters the context is because who is that person telling you that? Is that just a random person? I personally am extremely extreme about this. Like, I'm very particular about it, and I don't feel very comfortable trusting anybody unless I know them. Even if a person says to me, again, this is me, you don't really, I'm just sharing for the sake of sharing, that at one point, I wouldn't even eat at family members' houses. And I would not say anything to them, but they would all look at my plate. In my family, I'm talking about my relatives, my cousins, and my aunts. And they would all look at my plate. And my aunt, if I would be invited to her house, I remember vividly, she would say, Jabir, eat the chicken. I bought it hand slaughtered just for you. Please just eat it. No one, look, everybody behind you is waiting for you. And it's really like my whole family, my uncles, and everyone's just waiting on me. I'm like, oh my God, the pressure on this. And she told me, she was like, look, I bought from this grocery store that you told me with this product. Isn't that okay? So then I said, okay, I trust you. That's fine, And I said, no, it's not about that. And you just try to do what you can in that situation. But it does matter who that person is. If it's anybody, again, you have to trust your judgment on that. But we have to verify. This much we have to do. Yeah. Any other questions? If no other questions? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So what are the things that make your, ibadat accepted and not rejected? Off the top, I'm only thinking of these things now since I just spent an hour speaking about it. But, eating halal food obviously is one. Halal income is another. Not going to like a palm reader, people who do jadoo and people who do sihr and things like that and read my fortune and fortune tellers. And there's a hadith that mentions that anybody who goes to a fortune teller, their worship is not accepted for 40 days. Their ibadat, their salat, their du'as, they're not accepted for 40 days, even though it's still fard upon you to fulfill them. So that would be another category. Yeah, I can't. I would say for the most part, those probably it, right? A person who drinks alcohol, right? Sharib al-khamr. The question are, what are the different things that would not make your worship valid or accepted if you do them? Yeah. Right, right. So if you take an interest-bearing loan, then your du'as are not accepted because you are at war with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So, yeah, just... Yeah, that will not invalidate your worship or your ibadat or anything. That just puts barakati in that food. That's different. Yeah. And then also, you can make up for it while you're eating. Bismillahi awwaluhu wa akhiruhu. You can recite that dua and then it'll still fulfill the obligation. But yeah. Yeah, so again, I would say that I don't remember the exact context of that in detail. I do remember the story, but here's what I would say, which I did hint towards, which was that the meat of Ahlul Kitab is permissible for us to consume, granted the conditions are met, which is that it's the name of God is taken and the slaughter method is the same. It's slaughtered across the throat. So at that time, that's how all the Jews, Christians, and Muslims would slaughter. It was the same. They would all take the name of Allah and they would say Bismillahi ta'ala and they would slaughter the animal and that food would be permissible to consume. So given that context, there would be no problem in eating that. The issue lies with our times today because that definition of kosher is very different. And there are multiple organizations that redefine, define, and redefine again and again. They engage in a lot of different practices and that's what would make it unacceptable for us in most cases. Actually, we asked a scholar, a Jewish scholar, a rabbi, we asked him, do you trust the kosher labels in the marketplace today? He started laughing. And he says that any Jew that tells me that they eat kosher, with the exception of maybe 3 companies, I would say you're not eating kosher. So now imagine us Muslims who don't even know that world of kosher like they do, we are eating anything and anything that says kosher, then we're probably completely off. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I say this is a very sensitive subject because it's an issue that's plagued the whole world. It's not a matter of just America, it's plagued the whole world. You have a McDonald's everywhere, and the reality is that what happens there is that you see even in the Haram Sharif that you have these famous brands, these companies, but the difference is look, you don't need to be upset about it. It's just the reality of the global world that we live in. Everybody's connected. Everybody wants these brands there. So what happens is I just go to the McDonald's in the Haram Sharif and just look on the certificate on the wall. It says in front of the register, if you go to most McDonald's, in the Medina airport, there's a Burger King there. In that Burger King, on the side of the wall, they have their halal certificates. The beef is slaughtered, right, by the heart being cut, and the beef comes from Brazil or Nebraska in America. In most places, it comes from Nebraska, America. The chicken is mechanically slaughtered from Brazil. It's mentioned on the certificate. So these are things that we ourselves can see with our own eyes. So if you're going to be upset about it, there's nothing to be upset about. It's just, unfortunately, this is just how things are. So yes, now you have to do extra work. You have to go and verify, or you have to go eat somewhere else. And people, they get so upset. And I tell them, I said, don't even ask me. You want to go to eat your McDonald's, just don't ask me because you're going to get mad at me. Maybe you're going to give me a bad dua in front of the Kaaba Sharif. Don't do it. Don't even ask me the question. But yeah, if you want to know, then just look. It's right there on the wall. You can see for yourself. If you go to Restaurant Depot, right? If you go to Restaurant Depot, go to the halal chicken section. It's on every single brand of chicken that's there. Under the halal section, they have their certificates posted. Go somebody tomorrow and go look at what it says on the wall. It says mechanically slaughtered. It says mechanically slaughtered, mechanically slaughtered, mechanically slaughtered. So you can see for yourself what's there and what's not there. Yeah. So I think inshallah we'll go ahead and stop here. I know we have Salat al-Isha in a little bit. But Jazakallahukhairan for everybody for coming. I know it's late also. But if anyone has any interest in this organization, please check the website, inshallah, and communicate and reach out, inshallah, if you have any concerns or if you have any thoughts or if you want to see this continuing. The main thing is continuing the education. So coming again, going to the other masajid in the area, so that we can continue this work, inshallah. So, and we request everyone's du'as at this time. I was going to, inshallah, just request that maybe we can make a short dua for, we started this program by making a pledge or a dedication for the people of Gaza and Palestine. So inshallah, maybe we can also conclude with a dua for our brothers and sisters there as well. And then we'll wrap up and inshallah take a break from there. اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها ومولاها اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك وإنه لا يضل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت فلك الحمد على ما قضيت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك اللهم إنا نتوجه إليك ونسألك بحق رحمتك ولطفك أن تنظر إلينا وإلى خلقك أجمعين اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين المظلومين في غزة اللهم انصر إخواننا وأخواتنا المستضعفين المظلومين في فلسطين وفي كل مكان يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم خذ بأيديهم واحفظهم والطف بهم وكف أيدي الماكرين بهم اللهم كن عونا لهم من شرور الظالمين وارفع عنهم الأذى والظلم وجميع أنواع الفتن والمحن ما ظهر منها وما بطن والطف بهم فيما جرت به المقادير في عافية وسلامة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم تقبل شهداءهم وداوي جرحاهم وأنزل السكينة على قلوبهم وبدل خوفهم أمنا وحزنهم فرحا وهمهم فرجا يا رب العالمين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين السلام عليكم
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Strain the rows, fill in all the gaps. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا وإذا خاطبهم الجاهلون قالوا سلاما والذين يبيتون لربهم سجدا وقياما والذين يقولون ربنا اصرف عنا عذاب جهنم إن عذابها كان غراما إنها ساءت مستقرا ومقاما والذين إذا أنفقوا لم يسرفوا ولم يقتروا وكان بين ذلك قواما والذين لا يدعون مع الله إلها آخر ولا يقتلون النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق ولا يزنون ومن يفعل ذلك يلقى أثاما يضاعف له العذاب يوم القيامة ويخلد فيه مهانا إلا من تاب وآمن وعمل عملا صالحا فأولئك يبدل الله سيئاتهم حسنات وكان الله غفورا رحيما. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ومن تاب وعمل صالحا فإنه يتوب إلى الله متابا والذين لا يشهدون الزور وإذا مروا باللغو مروا كراما والذين إذا ذكروا بآيات ربهم لم يخروا عليها صما وعميانا والذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما أولئك يجزون الغرفة بما صبروا ويلقون فيها تحية وسلاما خالدين فيها حسنت مستقرا ومقاما قل ما يعبأ بكم ربي لولا دعاؤكم فقد كذبتم فسوف يكون لزاما. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.